Well, hello, my name's Joanna Frageorgia, and I am a public affairs specialist at AAA Northeast. I am joined today by Kristy Cuthbert, who is a graduate student clinician at Boston University in the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. We are going to have a conversation today about anxiety in relation to the pandemic and how it can affect our driving. And thank you so much for joining us, Kristy.
Thank you for having me.
So, just to start off the conversation, I wanted to ask about your observations. In what ways are you seeing individuals experience anxiety due to COVID-19? Are there any general symptoms? And in what ways could it interfere with a person's skills or daily activities?
Yeah, so we're actually seeing anxiety in a lot of different ways as a result of COVID. So one of the big scenarios is the one in which people have to go out to work daily. You know, they are heading out to work worried about what they're going to encounter. Are they going to take all the right precautions? There are so many steps to think about. Then on top of that, they're on the way home to their families and maybe they have to clear their throat and they think, okay, is that just clearing my throat? Is that a cough? Do I have a fever? I felt fatigued yesterday. And so symptoms that we tend to have experienced fairly often in our lives are all suspicious now, especially if you're having to go to work a lot. So that's one piece. The other piece of this is that individuals who are staying home are also experiencing a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. People are having to assist their children with online learning, which is incredibly hard. They're also having to balance their work life with home life, lots of home disruptions, trying to separate work from home life. And if you live particularly in a large city, a small apartment, it's hard to move from one room to the next and say my workday is over. So it's really hard to get away from all of our daily stressors. So this actually takes the form of quite a few anxiety symptoms that we know about. One of the biggest is rumination. So I already talked about if someone is worried about this symptom, they can kind of go off on a train of thought thinking, what is this all about? What does this symptom mean? That's a form of rumination. If you're staying home a lot, that might also take the form of uncertainty. This is never going to end. What if the vaccine doesn't work? What if I have to do this for a year? What if I can't get back to the activities I love? So these types of things result in rumination, which is this big future-focused, predicting the future process. The future just tends to be really negative in that process. And that makes things a lot harder. There are also physical symptoms you might experience, like neck and muscle tension. And then there's irritability, which can actually be pretty tough. People tend to have a shorter fuse these days, and a lot of that is just due to increased stress and anxiety. And that can have an impact on driving, particularly in high traffic areas. There's also fatigue and difficulty concentrating. And we already know that fatigue can be really difficult in managing any activity, but particularly driving. And then, of course, you have trouble concentrating. And often this is because of that rumination. If you're sitting in your car and you're worried about, how things are going to go when you get home, if your family's going to be okay, are you bringing COVID home to your family? You find yourself off on a train of thought, and it's easy to get distracted from the drive home. So in all of these ways, COVID has had a significant impact.
Yeah, I've definitely, honestly, personally experienced that myself. I would love to consider myself a good driver, but there are some impacts I think that COVID's had, even just on your my mental state when I'm driving. I'm thinking about other things more so than I would without that sort of stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
So, kind of building on that, from your knowledge, how common is it for driving to provoke anxiety?
Yeah. So I think we tend to believe we're great multitaskers. Research actually says we're better at doing just one thing at a time. So at its baseline, driving is tough. You have a lot of things to focus on. You're focusing on driving itself, operating the car. You have to make sure you're catching all of the signage, all of the stoplights, and of course, you have to be focused on other drivers out on the road. This doesn't even begin to include all of the kind of extraneous factors that come in when it comes to driving. So a day of bad weather can impact the amount of anxiety you feel while driving. I'm actually from the South, so whenever it snows, I get quite anxious while driving still. Um, Another area where this comes up is in the morning commute. People get really stressed, and there's a lot going on in high traffic areas, so it can be really tough. That can induce a lot of anxiety. And in particular, since COVID, it's interesting because number one, you have people who are staying home and not driving as much. And when those people get behind the wheel, there's a little bit of anxiety. You also have people who maybe used to take public transportation to work, but maybe they're turning to their cars because that's a safer option for now. Those individuals may not drive a lot in general, and now they find themselves behind the wheel every day. When you're first getting behind the wheel after a long time, there is a lot of anxiety involved with that. So that's another way that we could be seeing that resulting from COVID.
I completely agree. I think, one of the startling revelations that we've had at AAA is that, traffic collisions haven't gone down. One would think with, the pandemic and, let more people working from home, we would see that. But I think that might reveal a lack of, coping and skills and recognizing kind of those anxious symptoms.
Yeah.
So thanks for pointing that out. Now, with kind of, again, moving on, what are some coping skills and techniques that you would suggest for handling anxiety in the midst of these stressful situations?
Yeah, so I'll start with a really broad one. And I've mentioned this rumination, which is really tough. When we're facing uncertain situations, we want an answer. So, one of the things that we just tend to do is sit and think, well, when could this end? Might the vaccine be ready? That's what kind of leads us into this rumination, which, like I said, unfortunately tends to be negative. Sometimes we just think we're preparing for the worst case scenario, right? So, one thing I would recommend to just reduce general stress and anxiety is to kind of rewrite that narrative a little bit. Start thinking about some of the silver lining you might have experienced. Are you getting to stay home and be with your children a little more, even with ups and downs? Have you gotten to implement a new gym routine because you can work from home now? Are you really feeling like helping others go through this difficult time has given you a sense of value and purpose, even while it's difficult? These are things that you can add into that story that kind of temper the negativity, and they temper the uncertainty, because unfortunately, there just isn't much we can do about the uncertainty. So it helps to focus on the present. So when it comes to specific scenarios, like getting behind the wheel of a car, typically it helps to practice a brief mindfulness type exercise just to clear your mind and get ready for what you're about to do. So one thing you can do both when you get into the car and at any time, if you notice those thoughts wandering and running away with you and you're getting distracted, you can stop and do what we call 3 breaths of arrival. So when you sit down in your car and you get ready to go home and you're thinking about, did I clean everything the best that I could? Am I bringing something home to the family? Stop and sit with a very loose posture, your hands facing upward, and relax. You can even close your eyes and take 3 big, deep breaths. Again, we call this 3 breaths of arrival. By the time you finish that 3rd deep breath, usually the stress of the day is separate from where you are now, and it just helps to free your mind up for driving. Now, if you're out on the road and you get distracted and you find it's really difficult to stay grounded in the present, you can also do what we call grounding by engaging your senses. So typically the biggest senses that you're using while driving are hearing, sight, and touch. So you could identify 3 things you can hear in the moment. I hear the sound of the radio, I hear the sound of and I just heard the brakes squeak in front of me. Now identify 2 things you can see. I see the red of the stop sign and I see my fuel gauge. And 1 thing you can touch. I feel the heat of the steering wheel or the soft coldness of the steering wheel if you've just gotten into your car. Again, this is just a way of grounding you in the present using your senses that brings you back to the task at hand. Using things that are related to driving to do that can get you in the right mindset to get you home safely. So that's another recommendation.
I love those. I think those are so helpful, Kristy. And honestly, as a former driving instructor, I think, that can actually bring some of the fun back into driving, or just, being more observant, being more mindful. So I think that's great. Now, lastly, what would be one encouragement that you would offer to individuals struggling with anxiety related to the pandemic?
Yeah, so again, with such an uncertain situation, it's really hard to offer words of optimism or encouragement because this has really been going on for a while. And so what I can say is that we do know from who we've seen coming into our clinic that you're absolutely not alone. Everyone is experiencing increased stress and anxiety. And so, if not exactly encouragement, hopefully that gives a sense of community. And maybe it allows a little bit of that self-judgment to fall away, because we all tend to judge ourselves pretty harshly at times. And in this particular scenario, I think we're all examining our reactions and how we're handling this and thinking, I'm working from home, I should be doing great at this. Or, I'm a doctor, I shouldn't be this nervous about this. But it's actually pretty widespread, and we're all really struggling to cope with this day to day. We're all asking those uncertain questions. And so you're not alone in this. That's really, I think, the key takeaway that I can offer.
No, that's great. I know, even though we're socially distant and can't be in close contact, we really are all in this together to a certain extent. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and advice. I know many people will find it super helpful in dealing with these challenging times. Now, if people want to learn a bit more about your work, where can they go?
Yeah, so first, thank you very much for having me and allowing me to share this. I really do hope that people find it helpful. And if they feel like they might need a little extra help, we are available at the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders at Boston University. You can check us out on our website, which is at www.bu.edu/card. That's CARD. And you can also give us a call at 617-353-9610.
Thank you so much, Kristy. I know our members and communities will really appreciate all of this.
Yes, thank you.